And now the final remarks from the panelists, beginning with the side opposing the motion. Panelists, please stay in your seats for these remarks. Each debater has 2 minutes with a 1-minute warning. Gayle Smith.
Thank you. Excuse me. I think it's important to note that this debate is in the present tense. It's not in the past tense. The question is aid to Africa doing more harm than good? No, I don't think it is. I think it's doing more good than harm. Can it do more good? Absolutely. But I think if we hold aid accountable for all of Africa's ills, we're going to lose sight of what aid can do. Aid is changing people's lives. It is investing in transformation. It is imperfect, but it is improved exponentially. And I think if you asked a majority of people, whether they be people whose children are alive today because they've got ARVs, or whether they be people who now have access to wireless internet, and whether that aid came from a private foundation, from a government, from an individual through an NGO, I think they would say it's doing a lot of good, and I hope you will vote accordingly.
I think the first thing you have to do is distinguish between aid and help. The reason that this side of the table has kept arguing and insisting that aid does more harm than good is not because we're against help, but because aid is a system, and that system is corrupt, inefficient, and wrong-headed in the main. That you can have a zillion anecdotes that anyone would rather have, as I put it about humanitarianism, a bed for the night than no bed for the night, doesn't make it a good system. And the thing is, yes, if the only relief you get is someone bringing you a bed net or some fertilizer, obviously, and the choice is formulated as, would you prefer a bed net or would you prefer nothing? Well, then sure, then that you get a nice kind of Enver Hoxha-style majority for aid. But those aren't the choices.
1 minute.
The choices are talking about things that would have, if implemented, fair trade being, in my view, the most important, would have infinitely more positive effects. And that in effect, by concentrating on aid, we are ignoring, in fact, the things that actually would make people's lives better. That they would say, I'll still take aid if my choices are aid and nothing. Yeah, but that's really not the issue here.
I just want to stress that I'm of the view that we're all aiming for the same ambition, which is to support people who want to make their own lives better throughout Africa. And so I want to also make sure we don't lose track of the key question, which is whether aid does more harm than good. David Rieff, in his opening comments, rejected the proposition because it's not a good way to frame the question. We've talked about all these elements of the question, each of which suggests it's just not a good way to frame the point. The point is that for $30 per capita, even when I asked the question of the other side, they couldn't answer what they expected, or they didn't answer what they expected to buy. Because $30 per person doesn't buy you much. And the fact that we have so many successes shows actually that aid can do tremendous good. Does it solve all the problems in the world? No. Is it enough to provide magic across a continent? No. Should we put it into the arms of corrupt leaders? No. Do we do that on purpose anywhere? No. Do we stop doing it across the continent when it's caught? That's the point. We need to focus on the things that people are asking for and they want, the bed nets, the fertilizer, the medicine, the schools. We're seeing tens of millions of people benefit from those programs, not just the million that are getting the antiretrovirals. That was the one that was impossible. And I urge you to reject this motion because it's not even the right way to think about supporting those who want it. Thank you.
I wasn't the one who invented the objective of the end of poverty being the objective of aid. That's the title of Jeff Sachs's book, The Boss of John McArthur. That's the goal of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, to end poverty. And what I'm arguing, and all of us on this side are arguing, is that's an unrealistic and unattainable goal, that aid cannot achieve the end of poverty. And in fact, an aid system that is designed as it is now to be mainly about ending poverty cannot even be held accountable for anyone doing even these modest, tangible things that all of us agree are good things to do. Because money does not, unfortunately, automatically translate into results. The fact that you can say, for example, that a 10-cent oral rehydration therapy kit will save a baby's life from dying from dehydration due to diarrhea. That doesn't mean that the 10 cents will, of course, there's enough money there to pay for these 10-cent kits. And yet still, 2 million babies died last year from dehydration
1 minute.
for lack of these 10-cent kits. And what I cannot support is an aid system that aims at these utopian, unattainable objectives of achieving the end of poverty, which is up to the Africans themselves, not to patronizing Western donors. And I would support a system that does focus on modest, tangible goals for that aid agencies will be held accountable for, that they will be blamed when someone is supposed to get oral rehydration kits and doesn't get them and a baby dies. That is an aid system that would work, but that is not the aid system that we have now. The aid system that we have now does more harm than good by propping up the corrupt autocrats under the utopian objective that they are the illusion of creating development, which aid has failed to make any progress on throughout its history.
Well, you know, this motion is, they're ignoring the motion. It is not about the aid system. It's not about ending poverty. It is about whether aid does good or harm. One of the things that we have this evening, we have to remember that aid is always changing. For the last 22 months, we have been meeting under a congressional mandate on how to make aid more effective. We created a Millennium Challenge account, in which in one country like Ghana, we made $500 million available to the private sector that the government had nothing to do with. In order to get that money, they had to have rule of law, they had to have freedom of speech, they had to be accountable to the bookkeeping that we imposed, and it was run entirely by Ghanaians. The question is, the new paradigm for us in aid is it must be locally owned. It's the ownership has to be locally owned. It has to be sustainable, it has to be accountable, and it has to be evaluated all along the trail. So we are now in a partnership with the religious and faith-based organizations. We're in a partnership with our allies. We're in a partnership with NGOs. We're in partnerships with Doctors Without Borders, coming together to find the right solution to make it work. We do know one thing. It has to be African-led and African-owned.
I certainly understand how, Americans are very generous people, and they certainly would like to help Africa, but quite often, very often, they have been sort of encumbered by political correctness, the unwillingness to criticize bad policies in Africa for fear that if you're a white person, you criticize a black African leader, you'll be labeled racist. That has silenced a lot of people. The nonsense in Africa must stop. Bad leadership is one of our many problems in Africa. And the foreign aid donors compound this problem. Let me give you an example. In 1979, the Norwegian aid agency went to Kenya to help the Turkana tribes people. And the Norwegian aid agency decided that the best way of helping the Turkana tribes people is to build them a fish freezing plant. After the plant was built at the cost of $25, all the media people were invited, even the village brass band was invited. But there was a small problem. They discovered that the Turkana people don't fish. They raise goats. Now, we have seen blunders upon blunders of such foreign aid programs in Africa. Now, we are asking you to vote for the motion, not because you want to cut off aid, but to send a strong message that the system needs to be reformed so that better aid, smart aid is sent to Africa. Thank you.